It is August 13th, and the Marlins and Rockies are leading the NL East and the NL West, while the Cubs and the Athletics have at least a 4.5 game lead in their divisions. Hello, everyone, and welcome into this Thursday, August 13th edition of Around the Bases from 110 Sports, streaming live, as always, on the 110 Sports Network at 110sportsmedia.com/live, and also available on demand on the website, also on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. As just search for 110 Sports on those platforms for all of our latest 110 Sports Network coverage. Great to be with you here today. We've got a lot to talk about, including some new information just coming in within the last couple of minutes about the Cardinals and when they could resume play. They have not been playing for, it's now been multiple weeks due to their COVID-19 outbreak. So we'll get into the very latest information, some new information, as I mentioned, just in here in just a couple of minutes. Got a lot to talk about, as always, so let's go ahead and just dive right in, starting off with what you can expect on today's show. With the rundown, we'll start, as always, with our top four, which, as always, in the last couple of weeks, we've started with the latest on COVID-19's impact on Major League Baseball, and we will start again there today with the latest on the Cardinals. And when they could resume play, we'll start with that. Then we'll get into some updates on other storylines that we talked about on Tuesday's show, including the melee between the Athletics and the Astros from over the weekend. Ramon Laureano charging the Astros bench after an Astros coach instigated a confrontation there. We talked about that on Tuesday, and then later on Tuesday, suspensions were handed down, so we'll discuss that and whether they were strict enough and what people are saying about them. We'll discuss that. Then we'll get into some more reaction about a follow-up on something else we talked about on Tuesday, which was the Cleveland starting pitchers, Mike Clevinger and Zach Plesac, who broke protocols over the weekend, this past weekend in Chicago, going out with friends, their teammates reacting to that, and we'll discuss their reaction and some powerful words from star shortstop Francisco Lindor. Then we'll get into some quick hits, as a final point of our top four, I had like 3 or 4 or 5 players who I was just really wanted to talk about, who are doing incredible things right now, so I said, let's just lump them all together. We'll go through all of them, about 5 or 6 players to highlight, and we'll do that to round out our top 4. Then, as always, we'll get into some other news and notes, some other important items that didn't warrant a whole big top 4 point about them, but are important to update you on. And then one of our big segments today will be basically talking about one of the articles that I wrote yesterday and some of the research and information I found out in exploring 6 teams that have been off to surprise starts to the 2020 season. So I looked at one team from each division that has surprised. Most of them are surprise contenders, so they're in contention right now, and nobody expected they would be. But a couple of them are teams that we expected to be contenders, but have massive leads in their divisions or have gotten off to an even better start than anyone could have really envisioned. So we'll discuss that, and then as always on our Thursday shows, we'll wrap things up with a couple odds and ends, few notes, what we have time for at the end of the show, and then we'll do a quick preview of some of the weekend action coming up, some important series, some intriguing series. We'll get into that coming up. So let's go ahead and dive right into our top 4, and our first point is the latest on the Cardinals situation. If you've been paying attention now for the past couple weeks, you know the basic information here that an outbreak among the Cardinals has led to the postponement of 15 games thus far. It looks like it's about to be 16. The team has not played since July 30th due to that outbreak, but we are getting some new information in just this morning, as I thought might be the case, about when the team could resume play. When I put this point here in the notes as our lead off to the top 4, we didn't have a lot of new information, but it looks like we are getting some now. The Cardinals were expected to resume play as far as their next scheduled game was tomorrow in Chicago against the White Sox. That appears to have been postponed, according to multiple reports at this point. Looks like the Bob Nightingale of USA Today, Joel Sherman of the New York Post, and others indicating that tomorrow's game between the Cubs and White Sox is going to be postponed, but it appears at this point that the plan is for the Cardinals to resume play Saturday evening in Chicago against the White Sox, and then potentially play a double header on Sunday. USA Today's Bob Nightingale tweeting pretty much exactly that if all tests remain negative, the Cardinals are expected to resume their season Saturday with a double. He's saying Saturday with a double header in Chicago, and then they play Sunday. But either way, it looks like the team is going to. Okay, yes, a double header on Saturday. This information just coming in. It looks like the plan at this point, and then one game on Sunday. Either way, it looks as if the plan, assuming tests continue to come back negative for the Cardinals over the next day or so here, is for the team to get back in action this weekend, Saturday and Sunday, with 3 games in Chicago against the White Sox. Still looking at some new information. This literally coming in just as we were getting on the air. Derek Gould of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch writing that the Cardinals still need to get their workouts in and have been aiming for today to resume workouts. Baseball has been wanted to find a way to get them on the field at least 2 days. They've had 4 consecutive days of test results coming back encouraging. So that's certainly good, and it looks like, it's an important thing to note here. The Cardinals have been in a layoff for so long that it makes sense that they want to have a couple of days of workouts, or at least a day or so of workouts, before they resume action. Because, these pitchers who are going to be taking the mound for the Cardinals, these position players, haven't played in game action in a couple of weeks. And that's certainly an important thing to note. So presumably it appears maybe the team could return to practice today and tomorrow, and then begin play again on Saturday. So we'll continue to monitor this situation. I'm going to keep an eye on things as they develop, and if we have any new major updates later in the broadcast, I will bring those up again to keep you informed on the latest. One other point with the Cardinals right now is that it's been sort of reported at this point, and Commissioner Rob Manfred, talking to Derek Gould of the Post-Dispatch in St. Louis a few days ago, maybe a week ago now, indicating that it seems like 60 games for the Cardinals is going to be a stretch, which of course makes sense given the long layoff for this team at this point. Trying to get 60 games in the regular season is just going to be a huge task. Manfred indicating, though, as we talked about on Tuesday, that he thinks the team can be competitive despite not getting in 60 games potentially. So maybe the goal of getting in about 50 games or so. Of course, you'd have to go by winning percentage in that scenario, which I think there's been some reporting that some executives have been hesitant about that because we don't know how this is going to go the rest of the way, and there's the idea that what happens if another team gets shut down and then a team makes the playoffs with a 20-20 record, a 15-15 record, or something ridiculous like that, leading to some hesitancy. But that seems to be the way things are trending at this point. So we're going to continue to follow the situation. I imagine, hopefully, on Tuesday, the next time we talk, we'll have some new information. Hopefully by Tuesday, the Cardinals will be back in action. We'll be able to talk about that and not about them returning to play and not more games postponed. That is the hope in that situation. But that is where things stand right now. Some new information just coming in. It appears, again, the Cardinals plan right now, assuming negative tests, which this was the plan last weekend as well. Assuming all goes well, the team will return to action over the weekend in Chicago against the White Sox. It appears not tomorrow as scheduled, but Saturday and Sunday with a doubleheader in there is the plan at this point. All right, our number 2 item on today's agenda in our top 4. We talked on Tuesday as well about the bases clearing incident between Houston and Oakland over the weekend. Outfielder Ramon Laureano was hit by a pitch for the 3rd time in the series. There's jeering back and forth with the Astros bench, and Astros hitting coach Alex Centrone instigates a confrontation with Laureano, who charges the dugout. Laureano telling reporters later that Centrone made a vile comment about his mother, something Centrone has denied. Yesterday, Major League Baseball issued the suspensions in that situation. Laureano was suspended for 6 games, while Centrone was suspended for 20. Now, Centrone is serving his suspension immediately and will not be eligible to return to the Astros until September 2nd, while Laureano is appealing his suspension. Now, first take on this as far as general reaction from the baseball community. is that it's relatively unsurprising in terms of the harshness of the punishment. We knew that Cintrone was going to be held to a higher standard as a coach. He clearly instigated the confrontation with Laureano. It is the longest suspension for an on-field incident since former Major Leaguer Kenny Rogers was also handed a 20-game suspension following a physical confrontation with two cameramen in Texas in 2005. It's also the largest punishment ever given to a coach of its kind. In a statement, Cintrone saying, quote, "I accept MLB's suspension and will learn from this. Although I never referenced Ramon's mother, my actions were inappropriate. I apologize for my part in Sunday's unfortunate incident." Houston Astros manager Dusty Baker saying, "I just thought they threw the book at us big time. What can you do? The rule is the rule." So a couple things here in terms of my reaction to this. I imagine that we'll see Laureano's suspension could very well be reduced from 6 games down to, I don't know, maybe 4 or something like that. As far as Cintrone, he is absolutely deserving of that strong punishment. He instigated a fight very clearly, regardless of course, there's, Ramon Laureano saying that he said a vile comment about his mother, Cintrone denying that. But regardless of that, the video clearly shows Cintrone motioning for Laureano to come at him in a fight. That's a coach, a major league coach, during a major league game, in a pandemic, egging on, instigating a fight with a player from another team. I mean, I shouldn't really even have to describe, I shouldn't really have to even say much more than that. Honestly, I would have been completely fine if it was more than 20 games. Some people have said he should be done for the season. People have also pointed out that 6 games without one of the team's better players is much more of a punishment for that team than 20 games without a coach for the other team. And that's a good point. I mean, that's true. 6 games out of a 60-game season, a tenth of the season for the A's without their star. And yeah, he's pretty much a star at this point, or really good outfielder, center fielder for the Athletics. That's going to hurt them more than a couple of weeks without the Astros, without their hitting coach, as far as an on-field perspective, most likely. But that's a tricky thing to correct, because what is your solution to that? I mean, inherently you would say, okay, suspend Laureano fewer games, but he did charge the dugout of an opponent during a game in the regular season during a pandemic. So we can't exactly just let him off the hook for what happened here. His behavior was reckless as well. And I didn't see Cintrone ever getting more than 20 games. I mean, I was actually a little surprised that he got that many. Not that I think he should have gotten less. But that's, we mentioned the context there, as far as these kind of suspensions. So it's pretty significant. I think it's just one of those things that's tricky to balance out in that kind of a situation. But generally, I think baseball got this right. I mean, Cintrone needed to be punished strictly, and he has been pretty strictly punished with 20 games. In other suspension-related news here, to add this on, Los Angeles Dodgers reliever Joe Kelly, who was suspended 8 games for throwing near the head of Astros third baseman Alex Bregman and then taunting the team thereafter, has on appeal gotten that suspension reduced to 5 games. That news was announced, or that was reported yesterday. Kelly is currently on the injured list with right shoulder inflammation, and he won't be able to begin serving that suspension until he returns from the IL. That being said, the Dodgers probably have the ability to manipulate when he may come off the IL to control what series, to some extent, Kelly misses or is suspended for. So they can because he's on the IL, they've kind of got that ability to maneuver it a little bit. But that's to be expected. I expected that suspension to be knocked down a couple of games. Nothing really too surprising about what happened there. Some people, one last kind of point on this matter. Some people have made the comparison between the two incidents, between Kelly throwing near Bregman and Laureano charging the Astros dugout, but that's really missing the mark. Kelly's situation, he has said it. There's some new comments today which I haven't even had the time to dive into because just getting those alerts, that information just coming in a little bit ago. Kelly clearly upset about the Astros and their sign stealing incident, the fact that no individual players were punished by Major League Baseball as a result of that. So, but Laureano, meanwhile, said that if you believe Laureano in the situation, he said that his charging the Astros dugout had nothing to do with the sign stealing incident. He said it had everything to do. He indicated it had everything to do with what the Astros coach told him. So that's one point. Another thing that makes these two situations very different: Kelly threw a baseball in the direction of someone's head. So these are not apples and apples. Not the same thing. Very different, and I want to be really clear about that. All right, we're going to go ahead and move on to our third top 4 point of the day. We talked about this on Tuesday as well. Yet another follow-up here on some storylines we discussed on Tuesday. As you remember, Cleveland starting pitcher Mike Clevenger and starting pitcher Zach Plesac were sent home by the team after breaking health and safety protocols. After going out with friends in Chicago this past weekend, Plesac drove home on Sunday, but Clevenger it was discovered that Clevenger had been with Plesac on Monday after he reportedly defended Plesac in a team meeting and then traveled home with the team on a plane on Sunday. Both were placed on the restricted list by the team and have since issued statements of apology. This coming out, I believe it was Tuesday afternoon, after our broadcast. Plesac's statement, reading in part, I realize I made a poor choice to leave the hotel, which broke protocols and could have endangered other people. I understand that in these times of uncertainty, I need to be more vigilant and responsible, and I am determined to earn my teammates' forgiveness and get back to work. Clevenger saying in part, there's an implicit trust that each of my teammates share as we navigate a season during this pandemic, and I broke that trust. In Chicago, I made the mistake of violating the protocols, but the biggest mistake of all was not immediately coming clean to my teammates. I owe them better. I now realize that by even exposing myself to just one person more than necessary, I am putting myself, my teammates, the guys I compete against, the umpires, the staff, the Indians organization, as well as the game that I love at risk. There's no excuse for my actions, and I can only take responsibility and learn from my mistakes. So generally, these were pretty standard apology statements from these pitchers. One thing that I want to note, though, particularly from Clevenger's statement, no, his biggest mistake was not refraining from telling his teammates. As he says, his biggest mistake was breaking protocols in the first place. Because you'd have nothing to withhold from your teammates if you had followed the rules that are in place for everyone's safety. Now, yes, not telling his teammates, not coming clean after the incident is just compounding the problem. But I didn't agree with what he said, that his biggest mistake was just not telling his teammates, because that breaks the trust. And that's true, but that's not his biggest mistake. He broke that trust as soon as he violated Major League Baseball's health and safety protocols, which were very clear. There's no, and this was not in either of their statements, but there was no gray area here. Did they break protocols? Did they not? Or, should they have known better or not? Or was it not clear? Or were they confused? No, there's none of that. They blatantly broke very clear, established, well-known, no excuses, health and safety protocols that were in place. So I want to say that off the bat. I disagreed with that aspect of what Clevenger said in his statement. But one thing he did say, and I mentioned here, was breaking the trust of his teammates. Indians pitchers have been asked by the media about the situation in the last couple of days. Fellow pitcher Adam Plutko saying, quote, "They hurt us bad. They lied to us. They sat there and publicly said things they didn't follow through on. I'll let them sit here and tell you how they're going to earn our trust back. I don't need to put words in their mouth." Another Cleveland player weighing in star shortstop Francisco Lindor with words that not only apply to baseball and the Indian situation, but sub out a couple of baseball terminology in there, and it really also applies in general to the country right now. This is what Lindor had to say. Lindor said, quote, we have to sit and look ourselves in the mirror. And it's not about the person we see in the mirror. It's who's behind you, the other people. It's not about that one person. It's about everyone around you. The family members, the coaching staff, Carlos Carrasco, his teammate who was diagnosed with cancer last year. All the players on teams that are high risk. We're in a time right now with COVID, with racism, with everything. This is a time to be selfless. This is when we have to sit back and understand this is not about one person specifically. It's about everybody. It's about your neighbor and your neighbor's neighbors. It's not about you specifically. And I won't attempt to even put it any better than that. I will let Francisco Lindor have the last word on top 4 item number 3 today. So we'll shift gears here to our final top 4 item, which, as I mentioned at the top of the broadcast, some players doing incredible things right now I wanted to highlight. I considered putting them in news and notes or finding some other segment to sneak them in, and I decided, hey, let's just group them all together, go through some incredible performances of the last couple of weeks or so here to start the season. So we're going to do just that. Go through, I've got 5 players for you here I want to discuss briefly, quick hits on these players. We'll start with Mike Trout, who has shown some serious dad strength, as they say, in the last week or so. He has now homered 7 times in 9 games since returning from paternity leave. In that 9-game stretch, Trout is hitting .351 with a .919 slugging percentage and a 1,300 OPS. And despite that missing time, Trout is tied with Fernando Tatis for second in Major League Baseball in home runs with 8 behind only Aaron Judge. Don't make any mistake. Trout is the best player in baseball. Mike Trout is the best player in baseball, and let's not take for granted that we're watching one of the best players in the history of the sport in his prime. Second player I want to hit on is Charlie Blackmon. The Rockies outfielder is off to one of the best starts to a season in MLB history. Entering yesterday, prior to yesterday's game, the 34-year-old outfielder was 34 for 68 to start the season through 17 games. That is a .500 batting average. .500. Blackmon was the 5th player since Ted Williams last hit .400 in 1941 to be hitting .500 or better through 17 team games. And I say was instead of is because that stat is from Tuesday, and Blackmon is now hitting .472 after going 0 for 4 last night against Arizona, which snapped a 15-game hitting streak for Blackmon, stretching back to the 3rd game of the season. And people have been crunching the numbers. I've been seeing that information on Twitter that he's still, like I said, he's still hitting .472. So he's got an incredible, start here in potentially hitting above .400 in 2020, but he's still going to need to hit, I believe the numbers in the mid to high 300s the rest of the way to end the season with a batting average above .400. So it's going to be fun to watch, but I think we'll really start taking it seriously, the possibility of Blackmon hitting above .400 in a couple weeks if he's still hitting, .450 or .430, which these are just ridiculous numbers to even say out loud. If he's doing very well a couple weeks from now, I think this conversation starts to get very serious. He's still going to have to be essentially one of the best players, if not the best player in baseball, the rest of the way to hit .400 for the season. Player number 3 here is DJ LeMahieu, who was a late addition to Quick Hits last night. As I was preparing the segment, I decided to sneak him in here at the last second. After 4 hits last night against Atlanta, the Yankees infielder is now hitting .431 on the season. There's another .400 average candidate. That average is the highest through 18 games by a Yankees player since Paul O'Neill in 1994, among players with a minimum of 40 at-bats. That was also LeMahieu's 68th multi-hit game since the start of last season. According to Katie Sharp, that is the most in Major League Baseball. LeMahieu last night also became the first Yankees leadoff hitter with 4 hits and a triple in a game since Brett Gardner back in 2009. LeMahieu, this is a guy who was a great average hitter and a great defender with the Rockies, to begin his career, but he didn't have a lot of power. I mean, this was a guy who was maybe flashing 15 home run power with the Astros. And people feared the Coors Field effect, that all of a sudden you take him out of the very hitter-friendly Coors Field in Colorado, and he becomes a guy who's hitting still for a good average, but it's like 280 with good defense and like no power. That was the fear. And so he lands a multi-year deal with the Yankees, not a very big deal, and he didn't even have a starting spot when the Yankees brought him in. I don't know if it was a 2 or 3 year deal off the top of my head, but something like that. He wasn't even assured everyday playing time, but then, of course, Yankees injuries and then, of course, his own performance led that to change, and he's one of the best hitters, not pure hitters, in terms of batting average in baseball. And last year, he hit 20-something home runs. Maybe that doesn't continue, at least that pace. We're not going to see 20 home runs this year, but that pace probably won't continue. But LeMahieu, still underrated. He's a free agent to be this offseason. It's going to be very interesting to see if the Yankees can re-sign him. If they do re-sign him, of course they can. If they do re-sign him, or where he might land if they don't. 2 final players here to discuss in our quick hits. One of them, Dylan Bundy. It is August of 2020, and the player leading all pitchers in WAR at Baseball Reference is Dylan Bundy, the former 4th overall pick in the 2011 draft, now 27 years old, has been one of the worst full-time starters in the majors over the past few years with the Orioles. Never lived up, really, to the big expectations. Of course, like I said, a 4th overall pick 9 years ago. Now with the Angels. In 2018, though, with the Orioles, a 5.45 ERA and a league-high 16 losses. Last year, a 4.79 ERA. Things just weren't getting better, and the years were ticking along. This is someone who's 27 years old now. This season, with the Angels now, after being acquired in an offseason trade, Bundy now with the Angels is 3-1 with a 1.57 ERA, 28 2/3 innings pitched, 35 strikeouts to 3 walks. 35 to 3 strikeout to walk ratio. Manager Joe Maddon saying, quote, "It's getting to the point now where it's the expectation. He's just been pitching that well. It's the real deal. I mean, the pitches are that sharp, the swings are not good, and the takes are bad." As for what Bundy's doing differently here at age 27 after years of being just frankly bad in the major leagues, Bundy's leaned on his slider more this year. He's throwing his fastball at the lowest rate of his career by far. Catcher Jason Castro is saying he's got good command of all 4 of his pitches, seems to have a deep repertoire. In his last start, Bundy threw 103 pitches, just 23 of them were 4-seam fastballs. So backing off the fastball, leaning on the slider and some of his off-speed pitches, and it's working out for Dylan Bundy. In 2020, it's someone who, obviously the pedigree has always been there, the potential's been there, but it's been so many years that he's been mediocre to bad in the majors with Baltimore. He's certainly unlocked something, though. Nobody expected this. Going to be fun to see if he can keep it up in 2020, the rest of the way. Finally, last pitcher to note here, last player to note in our quick hits is Daniel Bard. We've talked about Bard before. He was out of the major leagues for several years due to the yips. Hadn't pitched in the majors since I believe it was 2012. Don't have that off the top of my head, but I believe it was 2012. He makes it back in the majors this season with the Rockies, and he is succeeding. On Tuesday night, Bard notched his first save in 9 years, 2 months, and 1 week. That's how long it had been since Daniel Bard had last notched a save in the major leagues. Tracy Rowlandsby of Sports Illustrated, in the game story for that game, writing, as Daniel Bard approached the mound at Coors Field with 2 outs in the top of the 9th on Tuesday night, the Rockies, having seen a 6-run lead trimmed to just 1 run with runners on first and third, he smiled at Bud Black. "I handed him the ball and he said, 'Let's close this out,'" Black remembered. There was a calmness about him. It was really cool. And it got better. Bard did close it out, battling Arizona pinch hitter Stephen Vogt to a 2-2 count, and then instead of what Instead of that 98 plus fastball, Bard delivered an 88 mile per hour breaking ball on the outside corner of the plate for a game ending called strike three. The 35-year-old has not just returned to the major leagues and been okay, he's returned and he is dominating at 35 years old. This season, Bard, 9 innings, 3 earned runs. That's a 3.00 ERA, 12 strikeouts in those 9 innings, and 0 walks. No walks for a pitcher who hasn't pitched in baseball, Major League Baseball, for several years because of the yips. 0 walks, 12 strikeouts in 9 innings. Really fun story. Hopefully he can keep that up. Daniel Bard looks like one of the better relievers in baseball in 2020. Who'd have thought? All right, that is our top 4 for today. Went a little bit long here, but we had a lot of good things to talk about, important stuff to get into. So we're going to go ahead and take our first break. When we come back, we'll go through some quick news and notes, and then we will discuss some surprise teams to begin the 2020 season that I wrote about at 110sportsmedia.com. We'll get into that and much more coming up. Stay with us. You're watching ATB Live from 110 Sports. All right, welcome back to Around the Bases from 110 Sports. I'm Chris Brown. As always, we're streaming on the 110 Sports Network, 110sportsmedia.com/live on demand, on the website, YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Here on this Thursday, August 13th, as promised, we're going to get into some news and notes before we jump into our surprise teams to begin this season. And we're going to start with some information that's just come in. Derek Gould of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. We talked about the Cardinals at the top of the broadcast. Gould tweeting that the Cardinals' schedule remains fluid at this point. Return to the field for workouts is still the next step at this point. In addition to the reported doubleheader Saturday against the White Sox, there are plans for a doubleheader next week at Wrigley to make up one of the postponed games against the Cubs. So we'll continue to monitor the situation with the Cardinals. The hope is that the team resumes play this weekend in Chicago against the White Sox. Also, just saying this in a potentially serious injury for Mets outfielder Jeff McNeil. He was removed from the team's game this afternoon against the Nationals with an apparent knee injury. Pardon me, McNeil crashed hard into the outfield wall and left after making a running catch in the top of the first inning. He tried to walk off the field, but eventually had to sit back down on the ground and had to be carted off. He was grabbing at his knee when medical personnel arrived. Potentially serious injury here for Jeff McNeil. Don't want to see that, of course. We'll see how that develops. Hopefully it's nothing too serious, but it does look pretty significant for Jeff McNeil. A couple other news and notes here for you today. MLB.com's Brian McTaggart reported yesterday that injured Astros ace Justin Verlander is hoping to resume a throwing program next week in an effort to return this season. Verlander has been shut down for the first few weeks of for the last few weeks now after suffering a right forearm strain during his season debut. McTaggart writing though that he's been making excellent progress. So Verlander attempting to pitch again this season at this point. Yankees outfielder Aaron Judge, MLB's home run leader, was out of the team's lineup yesterday due to lower body tightness. Manager Aaron Boone said he is hopeful that Judge will be able to play tomorrow after the team's off day today, but that's no guarantee. However, it doesn't appear to be too serious at this point. The Red Sox placed outfielder Andrew Benintendi on the injured list with a right rib cage strain. They're hopeful he'll be ready to return after his 10 days on the IL are up. Braves outfielder Ronald Acuna, the star outfielder, is dealing with inflammation in his wrist. He will miss the team's weekend series against the Marlins and then be reevaluated. Astros manager Dusty Baker suggested Wednesday that closer Roberto Osuna could return this season. It had been reported last week that Osuna was headed for Tommy John surgery, but apparently he will attempt to rehab his elbow injury. Pittsburgh Pirates reliever Kela will be activated ahead of tonight's game against the Reds. Manager Derek Shelton suggested last week that Kela could jump right back into the closer's role upon his activation. He posted a stellar 2.12 ERA in 29 and 2/3 innings last season. Arizona Diamondbacks starting pitcher Madison Bumgarner was cleared to play catch yesterday and throw a bullpen today. That certainly seems like good news after the lefty landed on the IL on Monday with a mid-back strain. There still will be questions and a lot of attention paid to him when he does return, considering the greatly diminished velocity he showed in his first few starts of the season. It's unclear, if how much of that may have been tied into the back strain and how much of it might not have been. Timeline still unclear at this point for Bumgarner's return to Major League action. Milwaukee Brewers veteran outfielder and first baseman Ryan Braun has been reinstated from the 10-day injury list. Finally, Miami Marlins manager Don Mattingly saying yesterday that the players the team has sidelined by COVID-19 are all asymptomatic and that some have applied for reinstatement. The team placed 17 players on the IL last week following their COVID-19 outbreak. And that is our news and notes for today. So we're going to go ahead and dive right into our next segment, which is, as I mentioned, new piece up at 110sportsmedia.com, which goes into detail on this sort of a common thing happening now. I do a midweek piece up on the website with sort of just whatever's sort of interesting at the time, looking at some storylines or players or teams that are interesting at that point. This week's midweek story, I looked at one surprise team from each division to begin the 2020 season. So, like I said at the very top of the show, we've got the Rockies and the Marlins leading their divisions. We have the Cubs and the A's with huge leads over the field in their divisions. So I decided let's look at the numbers. Let's look at these teams. It's interesting because we're still kind of in the don't jump to any huge conclusions portion of the season because it's just a few weeks old. And if this was, April, mid to late April, we'd be April 21st or April 23rd. If we were that far into a regular season, we'd be like, oh, don't get too excited, don't get too upset about a team's record just yet because there's still so much time. But there isn't in a 60-game season, so at the same time, it's kind of important to start looking at the standings. It's fair to start kind of trying to make conclusions, trying to draw conclusions and see where things stand because there isn't the time for a team that's off to an incredible start. That's a big advantage. A team that's off to a really bad start, you don't have a ton of time for things to get back on track. You've got some urgency. So anyway, I looked at some teams in each division that have surprised. You'll see from this list here on the right side of the screen, many of them are surprise contenders. Meanwhile, we've got the Cubs and the Athletics in there. We're not surprise contenders, but it's surprising how great they've been and how much of a lead they have in their division. So let's go ahead and dive right in. We'll start with the Baltimore Orioles in the AL East. In my preview of the AL East back before the season started, I asked if the Orioles would even win 15 games this season. Fangraphs had projected them for the worst record of any team in Major League Baseball. They were widely expected to be the worst team in Major League Baseball. But the Orioles are now more than halfway, almost 2/3 of the way toward that 15 win total. I'm thinking they'll get there now. In recent weeks, Brandon Hyde's club swept the Rays, then got swept by the Marlins, and then took the first two games of a weekend series against the Nationals before the final game was suspended. The Orioles then began a 3-game road set with an extra innings win over the Phillies, and then another win over the Phillies last night to improve to 9-7. So, what's going on with the Orioles? It starts with the team's offense. Right now, the team has posted the best batting average, the second best OPS of any team in the majors. The Orioles, I know, it's crazy. 7 Orioles batters have multiple home runs. Renato Nunez leads the team in homers. He's showing improved on-base skills, corner infielder and designated hitter. Outfielder Anthony Santander is one of the league leaders in RBI. Then you've got the middle infield where Jose Iglesias, the definition of a glove-first shortstop, heading into yesterday, batting .395, and Hanser Alberto at second base, entering yesterday hitting .348. I mean, just up and down that Orioles lineup right now. Players who you would not expect to be hitting so well are hitting really well, and that's going to regress to some point. But that offense, I mean, the numbers, I find it hard to believe that this far into a season, it's still early, but this far into a season, a team could be top of the pack in the AL in batting average and near the top in OPS and slugging percentage and all those things, and it could be a complete fluke. Clearly, it's going to regress some. On the pitching side, the Orioles, their team ERA hasn't been really great, but their relief corps has been pretty solid. ERA heading into yesterday under 4, .399, with 68 strikeouts and 58 2/3 innings heading into yesterday. I think they're a better team than I gave them credit for. I have to say that. I mean, they're clearly going to win 15 games. And compared to some of these other teams that we're going to talk about that have surprised to begin the season, they actually, the numbers suggest that it's the most legit. Now, those numbers are player performances that are going to regress. But just the amount of contributors on that team right now, which you would expect to have which, nobody expected to be good at all, particularly the offense. But it's been impressive. I mean, you can't write the Orioles off completely. I still think, we're going to look back in a couple weeks and the Orioles will be a handful of games under 500 and sinking in the standings. But got to give them credit for what they've done thus far. Second team here is the Detroit Tigers. They are 9-7 following a 7-5 loss to 7-5 loss last night. If the regular season were to end right now, the Tigers would be a playoff team, which is just an insane thought. Matt Boyd, who was a big breakout pick among many people, he's been really bad at 10.24 ERA atop that rotation, and also not faring well. Ivan Nova, Michael Fulmer, Ronnie Garcia in that rotation. It's been bad. 4 of the 5 members of the starting rotation have been pretty bad. Spencer Turnbull has been good, really good. But he's pretty much the only starter who's posted really encouraging numbers, which is why that 9-7 record seems a lot flukier than the Orioles' 9-7 record. On the offensive end, Miguel Cabrera, maybe some sort of semi-revival. He's hitting under 200, so it seems weird that I'd say that, but he just does have 4 home runs, which is a third of his total from last year. But like I said, hitting under 200. So the only real, the true offensive star, though, to begin the season has been center fielder Jacoby Jones, who's hitting .304 with a almost 1,100 OPS. He's been a power speed threat for the Tigers thus far this season. But overall, It's been interesting to see what the Tigers have done, but I think I'm really much more confident in them regressing than the Orioles. It just doesn't look sustainable. The numbers, the contributors on that team, just there aren't as many of them as on the Orioles. The pitching staff just looks bad. So I expect the Tigers to regress significantly. The Athletics were my pick in the AL West. This is the first team that we're talking about that's not a surprise that they're a contender. The Athletics 13-6 following an 8-4 win over the Angels last night. As I said, not a surprise that they're a contender, but the fact that they're leading the AL West by 4 games is huge. That's, of course, partly because the Astros are 2 games under 500, but it's also a big part because Oakland has right now the lead in the American League in wins. They have been on a huge winning streak. They've been faring really well. The team's offense going into the season was expected to be one of its greatest strengths, and it's been pretty good. Matt Chapman and Matt Olson have combined for 12 home runs. Robbie Grossman and Ramon Laureano, who we talked about before, have been putting up strong numbers, but there have been some players who were expected to be good who haven't been great so far. Stephen Piscotty hasn't fared well, neither has Marcus Semien or Chris Davis. So there's definitely the potential for that offense to be better. Right now, they're kind of middle of the pack in terms of offensive ratings. But the greatest aspect of the A's performance this season has been their pitching staff. Collectively, a 3.31 ERA for the A's. That's the 3rd best mark in all of baseball from the A's pitching staff. And that's despite 2 starters, Mike Fiers and Sean Manaea, with an ERA above 6.80. Frankie Montas, who we talked about on Tuesday, the most recent winner of the AL Player of the Week award, has posted a 1.57 ERA. Chris Bassett has been really good, and so has 22-year-old Jesus Luzardo with a 2.60 ERA in 4 appearances. The bullpen has posted the best ERA of any relief corps in baseball, 2.25. Liam Hendricks, Yasmero Petit, Joaquim Soria, Birch Smith have all been incredible. I mean, some of those names you may never have even heard of them. Others are veterans. So hop on the bandwagon if you're not. The A's are a really fun team. They are every year. I was kind of concerned because this is a team that often gets off to slow starts, turns it on down the stretch, but they're ready to go out of the gate and impressing so far this season. Shift now to the NL East, and that's the Miami Marlins are my pick for the surprise team. Of course, they've been one of the most biggest surprises in baseball, but things seem to be evening out. They are 8-4, following a wild 14-11 10-inning win against Toronto yesterday. The Marlins right now have as many wins as last year's American League champion, the Astros, and 2 more wins than the defending World Series champions, despite missing a week of the season due to their COVID-19 outbreak. It's been wild. On August 8th, the team became the first in MLB history to have a different pitcher start each of the team's first 9 games. With all that in mind, it's really interesting to see what the Marlins have done. They've had entering yesterday, they had a team ERA of 3.35. Now it is 4.22. The regression is starting. On the offensive side of things, they've been pretty predictably poor. Corner infielders Brian Anderson and Jesus Aguilar have fared pretty well. Not a ton to say about the Marlins. It just doesn't make sense. Their incredible start, but things seem to be evening out despite their win last night. Not going to spend a lot of time on the Marlins here, but it has been fascinating to see what they've done this season. But again, given their week off, we're talking about a 12-game sample size. I think things are evening out for the Marlins. Only going to touch briefly on the Cubs. The Cubs are the NL Central surprise team. It's not a surprise that they're competitive. It's not a surprise even that they're leading the NL Central. It is a surprise that they're 12-3 and leading the NL Central by 4 or 5 games. They're 12-3 after a 7-2 win against Cleveland last night. Their 12 wins matched the organization's second highest total through their first 15 games in the modern era, per ESPN Stats and Information. We all knew the abilities of the Cubs hitters, and they've delivered. Chris Bryant has slumped, but maybe hit homered last night. Anthony Rizzo and Javier Baez have gotten off to fine starts. Ian Happ in center field has found a new level. High offensive ratings. What's been really surprising has been the success of the Cubs rotation. John Lester has been great. Yu Darvish has been great. Kyle Hendricks has been great. Right-hander Alex Mills has been great. Everybody's pulling their weight. Even Tyler Chatwood was good before he sort of things fell apart for him in his last start. There's still real concerns about the bullpen. Craig Kimbrell looks broken in the closer's job, but I got to give the David Ross and the Cubs credit for what they're doing right now. 12-3. Some people are jumping on the Cubs have won the NL Central already. It's over, and I caution against that. But they've been really impressive this season. Got to give them credit for that. We'll see if that rotation can keep it up. It's been sensational. John Lester has been great. Kyle Hendricks, young pitchers. It's all been impressive for the Cubs. Finally, the Colorado Rockies are my pick for the NL West. They are, as the surprise team, they're 12-6 following a 13-7 loss to Arizona last night. They look like legitimate contenders, and I may regret saying that, but right now they look like legitimate contenders. And in my story, it's up on the website, I break down a number of reasons for that. Not going to get into all of them right now because time is ticking along here. I don't want to stay too long on this segment, but they are ahead of the Dodgers and the Padres for the NL West lead. Dodgers are going to win that division. I'm still confident in that right now, as confident as one can be. But entering yesterday, the Rockies, a big run differential, an offense that's been incredible. We talked about Charlie Blackmon, Nolan Arenado's hitting home runs left and right, and the pitching staff has been really special after being posting the worst ERA in baseball last year. So I'll leave it at that for the Rockies, though. Go to the website, 110sportsmedia.com. You can see that full story where I break down those teams in more detail with more information, and I get into the Rockies' situation. So those are 6 surprise teams to begin the season. We'll revisit this a little bit later, a couple weeks from now or so, and see where things stand. So that is our segment on surprise teams. We're going to take our last break of the show here. When we come back, we'll get into a couple of odds and ends, some interesting notes, and a very brief look at what's ahead over the weekend, some interesting series. That is coming up next. Stay with us. Much more to come here. This is ATB Live from 110 Sports. All right, welcome back to ATB Live from 110 Sports. Streaming on the 110 Sports Network, I'm Chris Brown. Just time for a couple of additional items here on this show on this Thursday, August 13th, to wrap things up. And we're going to start with a couple of odds and ends, just some other notes and interesting facts and articles and things I want to mention here at the end of the show on this Thursday. Washington Nationals outfielder Juan Soto, he is tied for 5th with Frank Robinson and Ken Griffey Jr. with 60 home runs before turning 22 years old. Soto hit a 466-foot homer yesterday. He is an incredible young talent who is going to be it looks like one of the best players in baseball for years and years to come. Still under 22 years old. It's going to be fascinating to watch what he can do in the years to come. Los Angeles Angels third baseman Anthony Rendon, we talked on Tuesday about his struggles to begin the season and how he had just homered, so maybe he was breaking out of it. Well, He's now homered in 3 straight games for only the second time in his career, so it looks like he'll be all right. He had been in a big slump to begin the season. Looks like Rendon will be just fine. Cleveland, the Indians are really struggling offensively right now. Per MLB.com's Sarah Langs, in 12 of the team's 19 games, the Indians have scored 2 or fewer runs. That's tied for the most such games in franchise history through the team's first 10 contests. That pitching for Cleveland is great, even without a couple of pitchers for the short term at least that we talked about, but there are some real offensive concerns with the Indians. Maybe they'll make a deal with the trade deadline for an impact hitter or two. I'm not holding my breath. They're going to be a contender, but that offense leaves a lot to be desired behind Jose Ramirez and Francisco Lindor. Final odds and ends note here for you. Not going to get into this too much, but a really interesting piece, an article from Eno Saris over at The Athletic. I wanted to discuss really briefly with you. A story was published Tuesday. Saris writing that if the season ended today being Tuesday, baseball's hitters would finish with the worst batting average ever. It's not just batting average either, as hitters' OPS would be the second worst of the last decade. In the piece titled "Where Has All the Offense Gone?", Saris looks at a number of different factors that could be in play in the situation. Among those factors, pitchers seem to be ahead of hitters. Pitchers entered the season in more of a mid-season form, it appears, while some hitters were in early season form. Pitchers were able to throw during the shutdown, but batters really didn't get much of a chance to. You can't simulate big league pitching very well, so potentially pitchers ahead of hitters being a factor in this. The baseball itself doesn't seem to be traveling as far as it did last year. Appears to be more drag on the baseballs, an indication that they may have changed a little bit again. Starters are also being pulled earlier this season. Hitters not getting a chance to face them for a third time, in which hitters have the advantage in the third time against batters. Among some of the other reasons mentioned in the article that Saris dives into, more shifting, impact of injuries, and other factors. The whole piece is well worth your time. Not going to get into everything, and I don't want to spoil it, but it's really interesting stuff. Will be interesting to see, particularly that aspect of this whole idea of pitchers being ahead of hitters, if hitters will sort of catch up and we'll see more offense in the weeks ahead. It looks like just from some of the looking up and down the scoreboard the last couple of days, we've seen more offense. Could just be a blip in the radar, but interesting to see how that trend's moving forward. Finally, as always, on Thursday, we get into what's on deck. Over the weekend, some interesting storylines to follow, but mostly just interesting series for the weekend. Not a lot of interesting matchups this week. It's a lot of pretty good teams versus not so great teams. Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, Kansas City, Minnesota. I mean, it's impactful for those teams involved, especially the contenders, but not particularly inspiring. Like, oh, that matchup's going to be fierce. Minnesota, Kansas City. I mean, anything could happen, but it's not exactly thrilling. Some interesting matchups, though. Boston at New York. The Red Sox at the Yankees, rivalry, even though the Red Sox aren't very good right now. Milwaukee playing at Chicago against the Cubs. San Diego at Arizona, and the Dodgers face the Angels at the Angels' home stadium. Meanwhile, again, no additional reporting at this time. The Cardinals situation appears to be pretty fluid, but the hope at this point is that by Tuesday we could be talking about Cardinals having been back on the field and playing games again. Their game against the White Sox tomorrow has reportedly been postponed, but apparently the hope is that the team could play a doubleheader Saturday and a game on Sunday, play at least the White Sox some over the weekend. We'll continue to monitor that and bring you the latest information on that front in the days ahead. Fingers crossed things go well there, because we were talking about the Cardinals returning to action last week, a week ago today as well. So we'll see how that goes. But that is going to do it for today's episode of Around the Bases, streaming on the 110 Sports Network. I'm Chris Brown. Thanks so much for joining us. As always, a reminder that 110 Sports live coverage continues tomorrow with the J Moles Show at 11 a.m. Eastern, and then again on Monday at the same time. Touchline Talk with Josh Doring on Tuesday at 11 a.m. Eastern, and back with you here on Around the Bases on Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern. Of course, make sure to check out 110sportsmedia.com for all our latest written content. Follow 110 Sports on YouTube, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcast for our shows on demand. And on the website, you can also, on the right side of the homepage, subscribe to the 110 Sports newsletter. It'll hit your inbox every Friday morning. If you subscribe now, it'll be in your inbox tomorrow morning with the latest written content, links to shows, and more. So that is our show for today. Thanks for watching. Stay safe, and I will talk to you on Tuesday.